Huge news out of London this morning. Julian Assange, the founder of WikiLeaks, has been arrested by the police in the UK. The president of Ecuador announced that he was going to kick Julian Assange out because essentially he was a bad house guest. They said that he violated the terms of his asylum. I don't know exactly what that means. However, needless to say, the Ecuadorian government, I'm sure, has been under immense pressure from just about every Western government for years to release Assange and essentially deport him to the U.S. There's no question that Assange has always been more of a liability to Ecuador than an asset. The Ecuadorians never had anything to gain from keeping Assange there. The only reason I could think of why they would give him asylum is that they honestly thought that he deserved it. However, by taking such a strong stance against the U.S. and NATO, I'm sure that Ecuador was starting to get worried that perhaps they were going to be next on the list for U.S.-backed regime change after Venezuela. So I can't exactly blame the president of Ecuador too much for looking out for the interests of his people and his voters and his government. So now that the UK have him in custody, first of all, what's it for? Apparently, Assange slept with some Swedish woman in Sweden many years ago, and the morning after, the condom broke, and they had, they kind of went for another round. But apparently in Sweden, if you sleep with a woman and the condom breaks, that's considered unconsensual insemination, not to get too graphic. And so the Swedish prosecutors were able to take this woman who had voluntary sex with Julian Assange and essentially trump it up as a sexual assault charge. And supposedly, this is why the UK police have wanted to arrest Assange for so many years. Because they're so concerned about, getting the justice for this poor woman in Sweden. But of course, this is just a ploy so that Assange would have to stay cooped up in the Ecuadorian embassy. Because now that he is in the hands of the UK police, he will quickly, I'm sure, be expedited back to Washington, where sealed indictments are awaiting his arrival. Now, these sealed indictments were accidentally revealed last year. And, I don't know exactly what the charges are, but you can pretty much be certain that it's going to be, espionage and that sort of thing. And, of course, in the last few years in the United States, prosecution of journalists under the Espionage Act has been rampant and been pretty disgusting. It's pretty clear that U.S. foreign policy has been losing the public relations war, and their only defense, really, then, is to arrest journalists who report actual facts. This is the only way of keeping their reputation intact, is if they just keep the voters in the dark about the wars. So despite what you may have heard at the time from conservative media and talk radio and such, I'm sure the mainstream media in Washington, places like the Washington Post, I don't think were particularly in favor of WikiLeaks. What Assange published was not damaging. At least the main bulk, the important thing that he put out, because he's obviously WikiLeaks has published so many things, but the really important tape that they put out was a video on YouTube called Collateral Murder, and a lot of imperial stooges have tried to make the case that this video hurt America, which is absolute nonsense. What it did was it exposed the reality of American foreign policy to American voters who have been kept in the dark about it. All that Collateral Murder exposed is that when you have the U.S. Army waging a counterinsurgency in Iraq, it's very easy for them to misidentify ordinary civilians as Islamist militants and then end up murdering innocent people who were just walking down the street, including a couple of children in that case. Now, the big problem is that this video was classified. Well, why was it classified? Well, the mainstream media and particularly the talk radio folks would tell you, oh, well, they only classify videos because it would hurt the U.S. troops and would get people killed if it was released. Well, in the case of this video, that's absolutely not true. The reason why it was classified, just like with most classified documents and classified videos and classified any sort of data, it was classified because it was embarrassing for the military. Because what it showed was the military gunning down, I believe, 3 journalists and a couple kids. And I believe they worked for Reuters, and Reuters was trying to sue under the Freedom of Information Act to get this video released because they wanted to know, what happened to our journalists. Why are they dead? The military didn't want to tell them, not because it was part of some secret operation and that, we can't expose the details because, this is top secret super spy stuff. No, it was because it was embarrassing. The U.S. government routinely lies to keep citizens in the dark, because they know that these wars would not be approved of by the American people if they knew anything about them. The wars aren't even popular as it is. So sadly, it looks like with the arrest of Assange that the First Amendment is pretty much dead as far as journalism goes. If reporters can't and news organizations don't have the freedom to publish information that they have access to, then we do not have a free press. What Assange did is no different than what the Washington Post did with the Pentagon Papers. The Pentagon Papers, of course, exposed many dastardly things that the U.S. government did in waging the war in Vietnam, and how they were handling the media and such, and lots of embarrassing things. But of course, these documents were all classified. And the folks at the Washington Post who published this were regarded as journalistic heroes, as well they should. And they even made a Hollywood movie about it called The Post, starring Meryl Streep and Tom Hanks, I believe. However, the New York Times and the Washington Post are not exactly sympathetic to Assange. In fact, WAPO and the New York Times are perfectly happy these days serving as government mouthpieces, because as long as they have good connections and good sourcing, they know that if they play ball with their sources, and they don't publish anything that's too critical of the foreign policy establishment, they'll continue to get these good scoops. And so as a result, the Washington Post in particular just ends up publishing press releases from the CIA and the State Department. That essentially is their purpose these days. And so when it comes to Assange, of course, the Washington Post and the New York Times are very happy to run with the narrative of, WikiLeaks is just their Russian front, and so there's absolutely no reason to take anything that they put out seriously. But of course, WikiLeaks does not editorialize on any of the information they put out. They put out raw data. They do not put out stories written in a particular way. It's not like they're antiwar.com writing about how they don't like American foreign policy. All they're doing is releasing documents, which is, of course, the most damaging thing of all. So with respect to the charge that they are backed by the Russian government, I have no evidence of that, but it would not shock me if that were true. Now, the reason for this is that the Russian government has an interest in trying to expose the U.S. government for doing bad things. Russia is a geopolitical foe of the U.S. empire, so of course Russia would be happy to help people make the U.S. look bad. But it's not like the Russians are manufacturing fake videos that make the U.S. government look bad. The Russians are only exposing things that the U.S. government is trying to cover up. In this sense, the Russians, in a roundabout way, are doing a public service to the American people. Much in the same way that the U.S., when they expose Russian secrets, are doing a service to the Russian people. Foreign governments are not always your enemy, but they are always the enemy of your government. Sometimes, however, foreign governments will do things that are good for the people of a country and against the interests of the government of a country. This is not hard to understand. You know, another example of this is how the Russian media has had very good coverage of the Yellow Vest protests in Paris and across France. A lot of the Western media hasn't covered that because, you know, they're kind of friendly to the French government and they don't want to make them look too bad. So in that respect, there is a use to having media sources that are somewhat politically aligned with different states across the world. Not everything that governments and that media organizations put out is propaganda. However, obviously there is a lot of propaganda in the world. But WikiLeaks has never had to issue a retraction for any of the documents that they've put out. Everything, as far as we know, is true. Nothing's been denied. The U.S. government never came out and said that the collateral murder tape was doctored. They never offered an alternative explanation for what happened to those poor journalists. So therefore, there's no alternative to thinking that that tape that was put out by WikiLeaks was entirely legitimate and true. Assange, no matter his motives, is a hero to the American people because he has exposed evidence to us of things that our government has tried to hide from us. When it comes to classified documents, the U.S. government and the American people are adversaries. The U.S. government is trying to hide information from voters so that we cannot best choose who to represent us in Washington. Now, the dirty secret is that unfortunately both sides are very much committed to this foreign policy, but if these documents were more readily available to the American people, and if we had the proper information to understand what exactly the bipartisan foreign policy consensus has wrought in the Middle East, well, then perhaps we could demand new representation. But anyway, please stay tuned to this channel because I will be putting out a follow-up for what ends up happening with Assange after he's inevitably extradited to the U.S. So I'll be following this story very closely. And of course, I hope that you click the like button if you got anything of value from this video, and subscribe for more, because I do put out videos every day. I'm particularly interested in foreign policy, obviously, and the economy. So I hope to, and so please do click the bell so you don't miss a video every day. And I hope to see you all back here tomorrow, hopefully with some better news.